Sometimes the most extraordinary moments don't come with warning signs. They don't arrive with fanfare or flashing lights. They sneak in quietly, disguised as routine, hidden in the rhythm of ordinary life. You think you're just doing what you always do, showing up, taking care of the usual, going through the motions that feel safe and familiar. That's what she thought too, that day on the range. It was just another patch job, just another wall that needed fixing. The air was dry, humming with heat. She'd done this 100 times before. Tape, paint, check the structure, move on. Nothing new. But ordinary has a way of setting the stage for what's about to test you the most. In the middle of repetition, you stop noticing the small changes around you. The sound of footsteps, the sudden silence after a burst of noise, the feeling that something's off, but you can't name it yet. The extraordinary rarely announces itself. It waits for a crack in your focus, for that 1 second when you're not expecting anything to happen. She didn't know the Navy SEAL was watching her. Not out of curiosity, but out of calculation, reading the space, checking every angle, doing what people like him are trained to do. For her, the task was simple. For him, the situation was shifting. And in that small overlap between their worlds, something rare happened, a moment that would rewrite both their definitions of ordinary. When he walked toward her, she didn't think much of it. He looked calm, maybe too calm, the kind of calm that doesn't come naturally unless you've been through storms. She kept working. Then, without a word, he extended his rifle to her. It was heavy, foreign in her hands. But what caught her off guard wasn't the weapon. It was the gesture. The quiet surrender of control from someone trained never to let go of it. She felt the weight of it. Not just the metal, but the meaning behind it. In that split second, everything around her sharpened. The dust hung still. The air thickened. Every sound faded except for the thud of her heartbeat. There are moments in life when the ordinary dissolves, when the simple act of being there turns into something else entirely. A test, a revelation, a line you cross without realizing it. That was the moment she crossed hers. She wasn't trained for this. She wasn't prepared. But sometimes, extraordinary doesn't wait for preparation. It doesn't care if you're ready. It just shows up and expects you to meet it halfway. The rifle in her hands wasn't just a symbol of trust. It was a demand for courage. A silent message that said, asterisk, you're in this now. Don't freeze. Asterisk, and something inside her answered. The mind reacts before the words do. Instinct takes over. She shifted her stance, remembered fragments of what she'd seen others do, felt the tension in her arms steady into purpose. The man in front of her didn't explain, didn't instruct. He just stepped back, eyes locked on her, silently saying, let's see what you'll do now. Ordinary moments only stay ordinary if you stay small inside them. But when you meet them with everything you've got, even fear, even doubt, they open up into something else. They reveal parts of you that daily life keeps hidden. Strength you didn't know you had. Calm you didn't think possible. Presence that feels almost electric. That's what was happening in that instant. Two people, two different worlds, connected by a single decision neither planned for. The range wasn't just a range anymore. It was a proving ground, not of skill, but of spirit. What started as patching up a wall became a lesson in readiness, in presence, in what it means to stand your ground when the script flips without warning. She realized that the extraordinary doesn't always arrive as glory or drama. Sometimes it shows up as a quiet test of nerve, a sudden shift in responsibility, a moment that asks, are you ready to be more than what you were a second ago? That's what ordinary moments do when you least expect it. They stretch you. They catch you off guard. They make you realize that life doesn't schedule your turning points. They happen between breaths, in the middle of something simple, when your guard is down and your heart is open just enough for change to walk in. Trust doesn't always come wrapped in promises or spoken through grand gestures. Sometimes it's silent, heavy, and unexpected. Sometimes it's in the look that says more than words ever could. That day on the range, trust appeared in the most unplanned way, in the shape of a rifle being handed over, no explanation, no hesitation. It was one of those moments where language would have ruined it, where words would have only watered down the weight of what was really happening. True trust doesn't ask for understanding. It simply happens. When he handed her that rifle, there was no briefing, no warning, no background story. Just an action so simple, yet loaded with meaning that it broke through every boundary between rank, training, and expectation. A Navy SEAL handing his weapon to someone else. That wasn't normal. That wasn't routine. That was instinct, born out of something he sensed in her. Something solid. Something he could lean on, even for just a second. It wasn't about skill. It wasn't about authority. It was about knowing, deep down, that the person in front of you would not fail you when it mattered. She didn't understand it at first. The shock of it froze her for a heartbeat. Why her? Why now? She wasn't part of his world, didn't have his experience, didn't carry his discipline. But trust doesn't always choose the most obvious candidates. It moves differently. It looks for something deeper, the kind of steadiness that can't be measured on paper. The kind that shows itself only when things go sideways. He saw that in her, even before she saw it in herself. There was something powerful in the silence between them. No commands, no panic, just an exchange of energy, one person stepping back, another stepping forward. It wasn't about who was more capable, it was about balance. In that second, he needed her to hold the line, and she needed him to believe she could. That invisible handoff of trust connected them more strongly than any words could have. True trust isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with applause or ceremony. It happens in moments when there's no time to explain. When one person acts and the other understands without needing to ask why. It's the kind of connection that strips away ego and status, leaving only what's real. He didn't say, "I trust you." He just proved it. He handed over the thing that defined his role, his responsibility, his safety, and he let go. That's not small. That's the kind of action that carries the weight of years of discipline, compressed into one instinctive decision. She could feel that weight. The rifle was more than metal in her hands. It was an unspoken promise, a transfer of faith. She could almost hear it between them, a quiet pulse that said, "Don't drop this." Not just the weapon, but the belief that comes with it. In that moment, she realized that trust isn't given lightly. It's earned in the moments when no one is watching, through consistency, integrity, and the way you carry yourself when things get hard. Maybe she'd earned it without knowing. Maybe he'd been watching the way she worked, the calm in her focus, the steadiness in her hands. Whatever it was enough for him to let go. That realization hit her deeper than any praise could. Trust from someone like him wasn't something you asked for. It was something you were quietly granted. And it came with responsibility. Once trust is placed in your hands, you can't treat it carelessly. It demands presence. It demands respect. It asks you to rise to the level of the faith someone has shown in you, even if you're not sure you can. She adjusted her stance, not because he told her to, but because instinct told her she had to hold that trust right. The silence between them thickened, but it wasn't awkward. It was alive. Two people breathing in sync, bound by an unspoken agreement. I've got you, you've got me. That's what trust sounds like when words step aside. The world kept spinning around them, wind shifting, sounds echoing, but they stayed locked in that small circle of understanding. He didn't flinch. She didn't falter. That's the strange beauty of real trust. It can exist between two people who barely know each other, if the moment demands truth over explanation. And maybe that's what trust really is, not the result of long relationships or shared history, but the instant recognition of integrity. It's the quiet belief that, even in chaos, someone will do what's right without needing to be told. That day on the range wasn't about orders or hierarchy. It was about the raw, wordless bond that can form between two people when everything else falls away and all that's left is trust holding them steady in the noise. Courage doesn't always show up the way people imagine it. It's not always loud, bold, or wrapped in confidence. Sometimes it arrives uninvited, in the middle of confusion, when you're standing in a place you didn't expect to be, holding something you don't fully understand. It doesn't tap you on the shoulder and ask if you're ready. It just appears, sudden, demanding, unavoidable. That's how it happened for her. She didn't wake up that morning planning to be brave. She was just there to do her job, to patch a wall, to go through the motions of an ordinary day. But courage doesn't care about your plans. It finds you where you are and asks you to step forward anyway. When the Navy SEAL handed her his rifle, everything inside her went still. Her first instinct wasn't bravery. It was disbelief. The weight of the weapon felt wrong in her hands, foreign, unfamiliar. For a second, her mind scrambled for meaning. Was this a mistake, a test, a warning? But the look in his eyes said otherwise. It wasn't a drill. It wasn't a setup. It was a moment that demanded something real from her. She could feel her pulse climbing, her breath shallow, the sound of the world narrowing until all she could hear was the echo of her own heartbeat. That's where courage begins, not in the absence of fear, but in the space between panic and choice. She didn't think she had it in her. She wasn't trained for combat or pressure. She was used to tasks that made sense, things that followed order. But the thing about courage is that it doesn't wait for preparation. It doesn't belong only to those who have rehearsed it. It belongs to anyone willing to move, even when they don't know what comes next. She tightened her grip, adjusted her stance, and for a fleeting moment, her fear took a step back. That was all it took. One breath, one decision, one heartbeat of defiance against uncertainty. Courage, in that instant, wasn't about heroism. It wasn't about proving something to anyone else. It was about ownership of the situation, of her presence, of the trust that had just been placed in her hands. It was about meeting the moment halfway. The SEAL didn't say a word, but his silence spoke volumes. It said, asterisk, you've got this. Don't overthink it. Asterisk, and that unspoken confidence lit something inside her. Courage often starts as borrowed energy, a spark from someone else's belief in you. But once it catches, it becomes your own. Every second after that stretched longer than it should have. The world around her seemed sharper, the air heavier, the sounds clearer, her focus narrowing to what was right in front of her. That's what courage does. It pulls you into the present so completely that everything else disappears. It's not comfortable, not glamorous. It burns hot and quiet inside you, pushing back against the instinct to run, to hide, to hand the weight back and say, this isn't mine. But she didn't hand it back. She held it. She stayed. Her hands trembled at first, but the more she steadied herself, the more her body remembered what her mind doubted, that she was capable of more than she'd ever been asked to show. That's the secret of courage. It doesn't need perfection. It just needs presence. You don't have to know exactly what to do. You just have to stay in the moment long enough for instinct to catch up. She found that balance, the kind that only appears when fear stops leading the way. He watched her closely, still silent, still trusting. And in that watchfulness, there was a kind of calm. It was as if he knew that courage isn't something you hand to someone. It's something you make them find. His action wasn't about testing her. It was about giving her the chance to see what she was made of. And she saw it. Not all at once, not with certainty, but piece by piece, as she stood her ground and realized she hadn't fallen apart. The sound of her own breath steadied. The noise in her head faded. The fear didn't disappear, but it loosened its grip. That's when courage fully arrived, not in a shout, but in quiet defiance. In choosing to hold steady when her instincts screamed otherwise. Courage, she realized, isn't something you bring to a moment. It's something the moment pulls out of you. It's built in the seconds when backing down feels easier, but you don't. There are times when courage looks like charging forward, but more often, it looks like standing still, not running, not breaking, not giving up. It's the calm that comes after the panic, the focus that returns once the noise clears. That's what she carried in her hands that day, more than the rifle, more than the responsibility. It was the proof that courage doesn't always wait for you to be read. Leadership isn't always about taking control. Sometimes, it's about knowing exactly when to let go. The Navy SEAL didn't lose authority when he handed her his rifle. He revealed what real leadership looks like. It wasn't about dominance or command. It was about trust, presence, and restraint. He had spent years being trained to stay in control, to make the call, to lead from the front. But in that moment, leadership meant something different. It meant recognizing that the best thing he could do was step back and make space for someone else to rise. There's a kind of power in stepping aside, and saying without words, "You've got this now." It's not easy. The instinct to hold on runs deep, especially for someone used to being the one others rely on. But true leaders understand that control isn't the same as strength. Real strength is measured by the ability to trust others enough to hand them responsibility and mean it. He could have taken the shot himself, could have stayed in command, but he didn't. He backed away, calm and deliberate, his movements precise, his silence steady. Every inch he stepped back was an act of confidence, not just in her, but in his own judgment. Leadership in that instant wasn't about barking orders or giving direction. It was about creating a moment where someone else could find their own footing. He knew that if he kept control, she would stay small. She would stay in the background, patching up the wall, never realizing what she was capable of. But by stepping back, by handing her the rifle and walking away from the center, he gave her the space to step into something bigger. That's what great leaders do. They don't shine by standing in front. They shine by the light they leave behind for others to follow. She could feel the weight of that decision even before she understood it. The way he handed her the rifle wasn't careless. It was intentional, steady, slow enough for her to know it mattered. The look in his eyes wasn't distant. It was focused, reading her reactions, waiting for her to meet him halfway. That's the quiet art of leadership, seeing potential in someone else before they see it themselves, and then creating a moment that demands they use it. He didn't hover. He didn't second-guess her. He didn't interfere once he stepped back. That kind of discipline doesn't come from ego. It comes from experience. It comes from knowing that leadership isn't about doing everything yourself, but about knowing when your presence becomes a limitation. He had already done his part. He had prepared the ground, set the standard, and now it was her turn. The space between them became the test. The silence that followed was thick, but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that says, "I trust you enough to wait." That's what leadership looks like when it's stripped of titles and ranks, a quiet exchange of respect. He didn't need to tell her what to do. He trusted that she would find her own rhythm, her own balance. And she did. Slowly, cautiously, she began to move like someone who knew she'd been given something important. Not just a weapon, but belief. Leadership, at its core, isn't about command. It's about empowerment. It's about giving people the confidence to make decisions, to act, to stand in moments they once thought were beyond them. By backing away, the SEAL wasn't giving up control, he was passing it on. That's what separates authority from leadership. One clings to control, the other shares it. She felt the shift inside herself the moment he let go. The usual hierarchy between them disappeared. It wasn't a superior and a subordinate anymore. It was one human recognizing another's potential and giving it room to breathe. That's the kind of leadership that lasts, the kind that changes not just outcomes, but people. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention. It works quietly, shaping others through presence and example. He didn't know how it would turn out. He didn't have a guarantee, but he acted anyway. Because real leadership isn't about certainty, it's about faith. The willingness to act on belief rather than control. The ability to trust your judgment enough to trust someone else. That moment on the range wasn't planned or rehearsed. It was instinctive. It was pure. And that's why it mattered. When he stepped back, she stepped forward. That balance, that trade of space, is what defines leadership at its highest form. It's not the loud moments of command that reveal who leads best. It's the quiet decisions, the silent nods, the wordless gestures that say, "I believe in you enough to move aside." That's how leaders build others, not by pulling them along, but by trusting them to carry the weight on their own. Why? It arrives, unannounced, and asks you. Pressure has a way of stripping everything down to what's real. It doesn't care who you are, what you've done, or how much you've prepared. It comes fast, without mercy, and it leaves no room for pretending. When pressure hits, every layer of confidence, every plan, every script falls away until all that's left is instinct. That's when you find out who you really are, not the version you show to the world, but the one that shows up when everything's on the line. For her, that moment came the second he handed her the rifle. The world didn't stop, but it felt like it did. The air seemed thicker, the sounds sharper, her heartbeat louder. Pressure doesn't wait for you to get comfortable. It moves in quick, taking over your thoughts, tightening your breath, testing every nerve in your body. One moment she was patching a wall. The next she was holding a weapon that didn't belong to her, facing a situation she didn't understand. And in that shift, everything she thought she knew about herself came into question. The body reacts before the mind catches up. Her hands tightened around the rifle, not from confidence, but from instinct. Her mind raced, running through possibilities she couldn't even form into words. Pressure does that. It blurs logic and sharpens sensation. You stop thinking in full sentences. You start feeling in fragments. Every movement feels amplified. Every breath feels like it carries weight. That's when the real test begins. Because under pressure, you can't hide behind rehearsed behavior. You can't fake calm. You either rise or you fold. He didn't speak. He didn't tell her what to do. That silence made the moment even heavier. It wasn't a lack of guidance. It was deliberate space. He wanted to see her reaction, to let the moment draw out whatever truth lived inside her. The best kind of pressure isn't designed to break you. It's designed to reveal you. And that's exactly what was happening. Every second she held that rifle, the question grew louder inside her. What are you going to do now? Her breath steadied, but only slightly. Fear didn't vanish. It just moved to the background. Pressure doesn't always destroy calm. Sometimes it forges it. That's the paradox. It's the heat that hardens steel, the tension that builds strength. She began to focus, not because she wasn't afraid, but because the fear became useful. It sharpened her awareness, grounded her senses, made her present in a way she had never been before. Pressure has a strange way of silencing everything that doesn't matter. It doesn't care about titles or background or training. It demands your full attention. The SEAL watched her quietly. He recognized the signs, the tremor in her fingers, the focus in her eyes, the shift from panic to precision. He had seen that transformation before, in himself, in others. He knew that pressure doesn't build character. It exposes it. You don't become someone new under pressure. You meet the person you've always been, stripped of excuses and comfort. That's the truth of moments like this. They don't make you. They show you. She could feel the tremor in her chest settling into rhythm. Every muscle in her body adjusted without her telling it to. She wasn't sure what she was preparing for, only that she had no choice but to be ready. The thing about pressure is that it forces clarity. You don't have time to overthink. You either act or you freeze. And in that small, crucial space between hesitation and movement, identity takes shape. She realized she wasn't fragile like she thought. She was capable, grounded, steady when it mattered most. It's easy to talk about composure when nothing's at stake. But real composure only shows up when everything is. That's when you see who's bluffing and who's built for it. Pressure pulls the truth out of people like nothing else can. It reveals the cracks and the courage. It shows you where you've been faking strength and where you've actually built it. And when the weight finally lands on you, you don't get to choose how you react. The reaction chooses you. It comes from every experience, every scar, every time you've been tested before without realizing it. She didn't think of herself as brave, but the moment held her steady, and she held steady right back. She didn't need to understand everything happening around her. She just needed to keep breathing, to keep her grip, to stay in control of herself when control of everything else was gone. That's what pressure teaches you. Not how to dominate the situation, but how to master yourself inside it. The range, the noise, the stillness, the eyes watching, all of it blurred into one frame. It was just her, the rifle, and the weight of expectation pressing down. And somehow, that pressure didn't crush her. It carved her. It shaped her into someone who could stand there, still, calm, focused. Because that's what pressure does when you let it. It strips away everything that doesn't belong and leaves you with the version of yourself that can survive anything. To prove you're alive. Change doesn't always come in loud, dramatic waves. Sometimes it happens quietly, in the middle of something ordinary, in a moment that doesn't look important until it's already passed. That day on the range was supposed to be routine. Just another afternoon, just another wall, just another task to finish before heading home. But the smallest shift, the handoff of a rifle, the exchange of silence between two people, changed something in her that she couldn't name right away. Every challenge leaves a mark, even when you don't feel it at first. It doesn't always leave scars you can see. Sometimes, it rewires the way you think, the way you move, the way you trust yourself. She didn't know she was changing while it was happening. No one ever does. Change doesn't announce itself. It works in layers, quiet and invisible, sneaking in through moments of tension and uncertainty. When the Navy SEAL handed her that rifle, she thought it was just a strange, tense encounter, something she'd tell later as a story. But the truth was, it was more than that. It was the start of a shift inside her. A moment that made her see herself differently, forced her to meet a version of herself she hadn't met before. Before that moment, she saw herself as someone who stayed in the background. Reliable, steady, the one who got things done but never made the decisions that carried weight. That moment shattered that image. Being trusted in that way, under that kind of pressure, pulled something out of her that she didn't know existed. Courage, composure, focus. It wasn't that she suddenly became fearless, she didn't. But she realized that fear and strength can exist together, and that realization changed everything. Afterward, she found herself thinking about it long after the moment ended. How his calm had transferred to her. How his silence had said more than any order could. How her own hands had steadied. How she hadn't frozen. How she'd stepped up without waiting for permission. It wasn't about the rifle or the range anymore. It was about what that moment revealed. That change doesn't require big speeches or perfect timing. It happens when something or someone forces you out of who you were and into who you might become. The strange thing about real change is that it doesn't feel like a choice when it happens. It feels like instinct, like something beyond your control. You react, you adjust, and only later do you realize that you're different. That's what she began to understand in the days that followed. Little things started to shift. The way she carried herself, the way she spoke, the way she looked at challenges. There was a quiet confidence there now, the kind that doesn't need validation. Once you've been tested like that, the world looks different. You stop waiting for someone else to take the lead. You start realizing that you're capable of standing on your own. He probably didn't think about it much afterward. For him, it was one of many moments, just another day where instinct led the way. But for her, it was something else entirely. It was a pivot point, the second where her story split between before and after. Every challenge after that carried the shadow of that day. When things got hard, she remembered how it felt to hold that weight, how it felt to be trusted when she didn't trust herself yet. That memory became her reference point, a reminder that she'd already faced the unknown once and hadn't fallen apart. Change often comes disguised as pressure, as confusion, as responsibility you didn't ask for. But beneath all that, it's an invitation. It's life's way of saying, you're ready for more than you think. She hadn't chosen that moment, but she had chosen how to respond to it. And that choice, to stay calm, to stand steady, to believe she could handle it, became the start of a new pattern. Change doesn't happen all at once. It builds, slowly, through choices like that. Days later, when she went back to the range, everything looked the same. The same wall, the same tools, the same heat rising off the ground. But she wasn't the same. There was something quieter about her now, but stronger too. That's what real change does. It doesn't always make you louder or more visible. Sometimes it just makes you sure. It gives you a kind of stillness that doesn't need to prove anything. Every challenge leaves you different, even the ones that seem small, especially the ones that sneak up on you in the middle of the ordinary. They change the way you see yourself, the way you carry your fear, the way you meet the next unknown. And once that shift happens, once you've faced a moment that tested you and found that you didn't break, you can never go back to who you were before.